Everyone said the wild horse would kill the girl in wheelchair. Then this happened. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Miller's Equestrian Center as 17-year-old Ella Wheeler pushed her wheelchair toward the fence line. The smell of hay and leather filled the air, mingling with the distinct aroma that only horse stables could produce. Her arms, strong from years of self-propulsion, moved her wheels with practiced ease over the packed dirt path.
Ella, honey.
You shouldn't be out here alone, Martha, one of the stable hands, called out from the feed room. Thunder's been particularly aggressive today. Ella smiled but didn't turn away from the paddock where the magnificent black stallion paced. Thunder, as they'd named him, had arrived 3 weeks ago after being found wild in the mountains. Standing at 17 hands high, with muscles rippling beneath his ebony coat, he was the most beautiful horse Ella had ever seen, and the most dangerous. "I'm fine, Martha," Ella called back, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark since the accident 10 years ago. "He's just misunderstood." Thunder's story had spread quickly through their small town of Pine Valley. 3 attempted trainers had already given up, one with a broken arm and another with a concussion. The town council was considering having him put down, declaring him too dangerous for rehabilitation. But Ella saw something different when she looked at those wild eyes. She recognized the fear masked as aggression, the pain disguised as fury. After all, she'd worn that same look in the months following the car crash that took her parents and her ability to walk. As she watched, Thunder suddenly stopped his pacing and turned toward her. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The stallion's ears, usually pinned back in anger, twitched forward with curiosity. "That's right," Ella whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "I see you, Ella Marie Wheeler." The sharp voice of Richard Davidson, the center's owner, cut through the moment. "Get away from that fence right now." Richard, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and worry lines etched deeply around his eyes, hurried toward her. He'd been her guardian since the accident, taking her in when no other relatives could be found. His love for horses had become her salvation during those dark early days. "Uncle Richard," she said, using the familiar term though they weren't related by blood. "I've been watching him. He's different from what everyone thinks." Richard's face softened as he reached her side. "Honey, I know you see the best in everything, but Thunder, he's not like other horses. He's wild, dangerous. The council's probably right about having him put down." Ella felt her heart clench. "No." The force of her own voice surprised her. "Give me a chance with him, please." "Absolutely not." Richard's tone left no room for argument. "I promised your parents I'd keep you safe. And you have." Ella reached for his hand. "But being safe doesn't mean never taking chances. You taught me that, remember? When you first let me back on a horse after the accident." Richard's expression wavered. He looked from Ella to Thunder, who had resumed his pacing but kept casting glances in their direction. "The showcase is in 2 weeks." Ella pressed her advantage. "Let me work with him until then. If I can't make progress, I'll never ask again." 2 weeks isn't nearly enough time, For traditional training, no, Ella interrupted. "But I'm not going to train him. I'm going to befriend him." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Ella recognized from countless negotiations over the years. "You really think you can reach him?" Ella looked back at Thunder, who had stopped again to watch them. "I know I can, because someone once reached me when I thought I was unreachable too." The old man's eyes misted over at the reference to those early days when he'd helped pull her back from the brink of despair. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. 2 weeks, he said firmly. "But you don't go near that paddock without me or Joe present. And at the first sign of real danger, we're done. Deal?" Ella's face broke into a radiant smile. "Deal." As they headed back toward the main stable, Ella could feel Thunder's gaze following them. Tomorrow would begin something extraordinary. She could feel it in her bones. What she didn't know was that her journey with Thunder would not only change their lives but would touch the hearts of everyone in Pine Valley and beyond. Dawn broke over Pine Valley the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ella was already at the center, having convinced Richard to bring her before sunrise. She sat in her wheelchair just outside Thunder's paddock, doing something that made most of the stable hands shake their heads. She was reading aloud from Black Beauty. "That's your grand plan?" Joe, the head trainer, asked skeptically. "Reading to him?" Ella marked her page before looking up. "Voice and presence, Joe. Let him get used to me being here, to the sound of my voice. No pressure, no demands." Joe scratched his beard, unconvinced. "Horse ain't gonna understand the story, girl." "Maybe not," Ella smiled. "But he'll understand the intention behind it." For 3 days, Ella followed the same routine. She arrived at dawn, positioned herself a safe distance from the fence, and read for hours. Thunder's behavior began to change subtly. Instead of his constant agitated pacing, he would sometimes stand still, ears twitching toward her voice. On the 4th day, something remarkable happened. Ella was reading a particularly moving passage when she heard the soft thud of hooves approaching. Looking up slowly, she found Thunder standing at the fence, closer than he'd ever been. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, trying to make sense of her. "Hello, beautiful," she said softly, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thunder's ears swiveled forward, then back, then forward again. He took another step closer. "Ella," Richard warned from where he stood nearby. "Don't move." "I won't," she assured him, though she longed to reach out toward the magnificent creature before her. Instead, she simply continued reading, pretending not to notice when Thunder lowered his head to better hear her words. Word spread quickly through the small town about the girl in the wheelchair who spent her mornings reading to the wild stallion. People began to gather at a distance to watch, though Ella paid them no mind. Her focus remained solely on Thunder. By the end of the first week, she had progressed to bringing apples with her, though she never tried to feed him directly. Instead, she would place one on the fence post and wheel herself back, continuing her reading while Thunder debated whether to approach the offering. It was during one of these sessions that Sarah Mills, a local reporter, approached Richard. "Mr. Davidson," she said, notebook in hand, "would you mind commenting on what exactly Miss Wheeler is trying to accomplish here?" Richard watched as Thunder finally stepped forward to take the apple, his movements careful and deliberate. "She's teaching him trust," he replied simply. "But surely there are more conventional methods, Conventional methods failed," Richard interrupted. 3 experienced trainers couldn't get near him. But look, as they watched, Thunder finished his apple and, instead of retreating as he usually did, remained by the fence. Ella had stopped reading and was simply sitting quietly, her blue eyes meeting Thunder's brown ones in a silent exchange. "She sees him," Richard continued softly, "not as a wild thing to be broken, but as a soul that needs understanding. That's something you can't teach." The reporter scribbled furiously in her notebook. "And what about the showcase? It's barely a week away now." Richard's face tightened with concern. "One step at a time. Right now, we're just grateful he's not trying to kick down the fence anymore." But Ella had greater plans than anyone suspected. That evening, as Richard drove her home, she finally shared her full vision. "I want to ride him at the showcase," she announced. Richard nearly drove off the road. "You what?" "Not traditionally," she quickly added. "I've been designing a special saddle, one that would work with my wheelchair harness. I've already talked to Dr. Peterson about it." "Ella," Richard's voice was strained. "He hasn't even let anyone touch him yet." "He will," she said with quiet certainty. "He just needs to know he has a choice." As they pulled into their driveway, Richard turned to really look at his ward. The determination in her eyes reminded him so much of her father that it made his chest ache. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked gently. Ella was quiet for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. "Because everyone deserves a chance to prove them wrong," she finally said. "Thunder, me." Everyone who's ever been told they can't do something. Richard felt tears prick at his eyes. Your parents would be so proud of you, you know that? Ella smiled, though her own eyes were wet. I know. That's why I have to try. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. Thunder was agitated, pacing the fence line and snorting at anything that moved. Dark clouds gathered overhead, promising a storm, fitting weather for the stallion's mood. Maybe we should skip today, Richard suggested, eyeing the horse's aggressive behavior, but Ella shook her head, already positioning her wheelchair in her usual spot.
No.
This is important. He needs to know I'll be here no matter what. The first raindrops began to fall as Ella opened her book. Thunder's pacing became more frantic, his hooves throwing up clods of mud. Then came the thunder, real thunder, and the stallion reared, letting out a terrified whinny that made everyone jump. That's it, Joe stepped forward. We're getting you out of here. Wait, Ella's voice cut through the storm. She'd closed her book and was watching Thunder intently. Look at him. He's not angry. He's scared. Indeed, the mighty stallion was trembling, his eyes rolling white with fear. Each crack of thunder made him flinch, and he kept looking toward Ella's position as if seeking reassurance. Without warning, Ella began to sing. Her clear voice carried across the paddock, singing an old lullaby her mother used to comfort her during storms. Thunder's ears swiveled toward her, his pacing slowing. Amazing, Martha whispered from beneath the stable overhang. Look at that. As the storm intensified, Ella continued singing, her voice steady despite the rain soaking through her clothes. Thunder moved closer to the fence, drawn to the one calm presence in his world of chaos. Then it happened. Thunder stretched his neck over the fence, and for the first time, voluntarily touched his muzzle to Ella's outstretched hand. Nobody move, Richard breathed, though the warning was unnecessary. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Ella kept singing softly, her hand remaining still as Thunder explored it with his lips. His breathing synced with hers, their connection palpable even through the falling rain. The moment was captured by Sarah Mills, who had been sheltering nearby with her camera. The photograph would later become famous. A soaking wet girl in a wheelchair, face tilted up toward a massive black stallion, both seemingly oblivious to the storm raging around them. When the rain finally stopped, Thunder didn't retreat. He stayed by the fence, allowing Ella to stroke his nose while Richard and Joe watched in amazement. I think, Ella said softly, it's time to try the gate. Richard started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. He recognized the moment for what it was, a breakthrough that might never come again. With painstaking slowness, Joe opened the paddock gate. Ella wheeled herself inside, her movements deliberate and calm. Thunder watched her approach, his ears forward with interest rather than pinned back in fear. Hi, handsome, she murmured, stopping a few feet away. Thank you for trusting me. What happened next would be talked about in Pine Valley for years to come. Thunder walked to Ella and lowered his head, placing it gently in her lap like a dog seeking comfort. She stroked his forelock, tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. Good boy, she whispered. We're going to be amazing together. The news spread through town like wildfire. The wild stallion that had injured 3 trainers had been gentled by a girl in a wheelchair. But Ella knew they were only beginning. That evening, she showed Richard her detailed plans for the showcase. The specially designed saddle had arrived, along with a harness system that would secure her safely while allowing Thunder freedom of movement. You've really thought this through, Richard said, studying the diagrams. I have, Ella confirmed, but I'll need your help. We have 5 days to get him used to the equipment and teach him to respond to my signals. Richard looked at his ward, seeing not the broken child he'd taken in years ago, but a strong young woman with a vision. What do you need me to do? Ella's smile lit up the room. First, we need to modify the mounting ramp. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Word had spread beyond Pine Valley, and reporters began showing up at the center, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl who had tamed the wild stallion. Richard kept them at bay, knowing that Thunder needed calm and consistency. Ella spent every possible moment with Thunder, gradually introducing him to the equipment. The special saddle, designed with extra stability features and quick-release mechanisms, was first presented as something for him to investigate. Thunder sniffed it cautiously, then looked to Ella for reassurance. "See? Nothing scary," she said softly, letting him watch as she ran her hands over the leather. "This is how we're going to fly together." The most challenging part was teaching Thunder to stand beside the modified mounting ramp. The structure, necessary for Ella to transfer safely from her wheelchair to his back, initially spooked him, but Ella's patience was endless. "You know what people don't understand about horses?" she told Martha one afternoon, while Thunder investigated the ramp for the 100th time. "They're not afraid of things. They're afraid of what things might do to them, just like people." On the morning of the 4th day, they attempted their first mount. Richard and Joe stood ready to assist, but Ella had been clear Thunder needed to choose to participate. "Okay, handsome." She wheeled herself to the top of the ramp where she was level with Thunder's back. "What do you say we try something new?" Thunder stood perfectly still, his ears focused on her voice. With slow, deliberate movements, Ella began the transfer. The moment she touched his back, Thunder tensed. "Easy," she soothed. "I've got you." What happened next brought tears to Martha's eyes. Instead of spooking, Thunder turned his head to watch Ella, then carefully shifted his weight to help her find her balance. It was as if he understood her vulnerability and had decided to protect rather than fear it. "Would you look at that?" Joe whispered. "It's like they were made for each other." The next challenge was teaching Thunder to respond to Ella's unique way of communicating commands. Unable to use her legs for traditional riding signals, she had developed a system using voice commands and light rein contact. Thunder proved to be an apt student, seeming to sense her intentions almost before she expressed them. By the evening before the showcase, they had progressed to walking and even trotting around the arena. The sight of Ella, sitting tall and confident on Thunder's back, her wheelchair forgotten by the ramp, brought spectators to tears. Sarah Mills, who had been granted exclusive access to document their journey, captured a quiet moment between them. Ella was leaning forward, her arms wrapped around Thunder's neck, while he stood motionless, one ear turned back to listen to her whispered words. "What are you telling him?" Sarah asked. Ella sat up, her eyes shining. "I'm telling him about tomorrow, about how we're going to show everyone that being different doesn't mean being less." That night, as Richard drove them home, he finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Ella, what if something goes wrong tomorrow? There will be crowds, noise. Thunder's come so far, but he's still unpredictable." Ella was quiet for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you remember what you told me after my first riding lesson after the accident? When I was terrified of falling?" Richard smiled at the memory. "I told you that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about not letting fear stop you." "Exactly." Ella turned to him. "Thunder and we're not afraid of falling anymore. We're ready to fly." As they pulled into the driveway, Richard noticed lights on in their house. "Were you expecting visitors?" Ella's face broke into a huge grin. "Actually, yes. I have a surprise for you." Opening the front door, they found the house full of people. Dr. Peterson was there with the final adjustments for Ella's riding harness. Martha had brought enough food to feed an army. But most surprisingly, there stood Tom Wheeler, Ella's uncle from California, whom she hadn't seen since before the accident. "Uncle Tom?" Richard's voice cracked with emotion. "Couldn't miss my niece's big day," Tom said, stepping forward to hug his brother's daughter. "When Sarah's article reached California, I knew I had to come." Ella looked around at the gathered faces, her family, both blood and chosen, and felt her heart swell. "Thank you all for believing in us." As the evening wound down, Tom pulled Richard aside. "You've done an amazing job with her, Rich. My brother would be proud." Richard watched Ella laughing with Martha, her eyes bright with excitement about tomorrow. She did all the hard work. I just gave her a safe place to heal. Sometimes, Tom said quietly, that's all anyone needs. The morning of the showcase dawned clear and crisp. By 8 a.m., the Miller's Equestrian Center parking lot was filled with cars, and bleachers around the main arena were packed with spectators. News vans lined the entrance, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Ella sat in the stable with Thunder, both of them listening to the growing crowd outside. The stallion's ears twitched at each new sound, but his eyes remained calm, focused on her. Just like we practiced, she said softly, running a brush over his gleaming coat. Though I doubt you need this grooming, you're already the most handsome horse here. Richard appeared at the stall door, wearing his best suit. They're ready for you, honey. Are you sure about this? Ella nodded, her face serene despite the butterflies in her stomach. We both are. The mounting process went smoothly, Thunder standing perfectly still by the ramp as Ella transferred onto his back. The special saddle and harness system, now familiar to them both, provided security without restriction. As Joe secured the final safety strap, a hush fell over the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Please welcome our special showcase presentation, Ella Wheeler and Thunder. As they entered the arena, Ella felt Thunder's muscles tense beneath her. The crowd was larger than anything they'd practiced with, and camera flashes sparked like lightning. But then something remarkable happened. Thunder turned his head slightly, focusing on Ella's face. In that moment, it was as if he was asking, "Are you with me?" "Always," she whispered, and felt him relax. Their routine began simply, a walking demonstration of their unique communication system. Thunder responded to each subtle command with fluid grace, his steps precise and measured. The crowd watched in amazed silence as horse and rider moved as one. Then came the trotting portion. Thunder's pace increased, but his movements remained smooth, carefully adjusted to keep Ella secure. They circled the arena, demonstrating turns and transitions that many had deemed impossible for a rider without use of her legs. But it was the final part of their demonstration that left everyone breathless. Ella guided Thunder to the center of the arena, then did something that made Richard's heart stop. She unfastened her safety harness. Trust goes both ways. Her voice carried clearly through the sudden silence. Sometimes you have to let go of security to find freedom. With that, she gave Thunder the signal they'd practiced in secret. The magnificent stallion reared, reaching toward the sky with his forelegs. But instead of the chaos everyone expected, Ella moved with him perfectly, her upper body strength and balance keeping her centered as Thunder stood like a statue on his hind legs. The crowd erupted in gasps and applause. Cameras flashed frantically, but Ella and Thunder remained frozen in their pose, a living sculpture of trust and partnership. As Thunder returned to all fours, tears streamed down Martha's face. "It's like watching a miracle," she whispered to Joe, but they weren't finished. For their final movement, Ella guided Thunder into a slow canter. The stallion's powerful strides ate up the ground, his mane and tail flowing like black silk. Ella's face shone with pure joy as they circled the arena, her wheelchair forgotten by the ramp, her spirits soaring with every stride. When they finally came to a stop, the silence lasted for one heartbeat before the crowd exploded in a standing ovation. Thunder, who once would have spooked at such noise, stood proudly, his ears forward, head high. Richard rushed forward to help Ella dismount, but she wasn't ready to leave Thunder's back just yet. Instead, she leaned forward to hug his neck, and the stallion turned to nuzzle her leg. Sarah Mills, wiping tears from her eyes, captured the moment with her camera. The photo would later win awards and be featured in magazines worldwide. The girl who couldn't walk and the horse who couldn't be tamed, proving that limitations exist only in the minds of those who believe in them. As Ella finally returned to her wheelchair, surrounded by admirers and reporters, Richard noticed something extraordinary. Thunder, instead of retreating to his stall as planned, followed her through the crowd, carefully positioning himself between her and the pressing spectators. "He's protecting her," Tom observed, his voice thick with emotion. "No," Richard corrected softly, watching as Thunder lowered his head to Ella's shoulder. "They're protecting each other." The months following the showcase brought changes no one could have predicted. Ella and Thunder's story went viral, inspiring millions around the world. Letters poured in from wheelchair users, horse enthusiasts, and people facing their own challenges, all touched by their remarkable bond. One autumn morning, as golden leaves danced across the paddock, Ella received a visitor who would change everything. Dr. Sarah Bennett, director of the National Therapeutic Riding Center, had traveled from Colorado to meet them. "What you've accomplished here is extraordinary," Dr. Bennett said, watching Thunder follow Ella's wheelchair around the arena. "Have you considered sharing your methods with others?"
Ella paused.
Her hand automatically reaching for Thunder's muzzle as he nudged her shoulder. "What do you mean?" "We'd like to develop a program based on your techniques. There are so many people who could benefit from this approach to adaptive riding." The idea took root quickly. With Richard's support and Dr. Bennett's guidance, Ella began developing a curriculum. They converted part of Miller's Equestrian Center into a therapeutic riding facility, complete with specialized equipment and trained staff. The first student arrived in spring, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus who had lost his legs in an accident. He sat in his wheelchair, looking terrified as Thunder approached. "He's so big," Marcus whispered. Ella smiled, remembering her own initial fears. "Yes, but size isn't what matters. It's heart. Want to know a secret?" Marcus nodded eagerly. "Thunder was more scared than you when he first came here. Sometimes the biggest, strongest beings are the most afraid. But fear doesn't have to stop us. It can teach us." Over the next hour, Ella guided Marcus through their trust-building process. By the end of the session, the boy was holding out an apple for Thunder, his face glowing with accomplishment. "Mom!" he called to his mother, who was watching through tears. "Did you see? He trusts me." The program grew rapidly. Children and adults with various disabilities came from across the country to learn from Ella and Thunder. The stallion seemed to understand his new role, adjusting his behavior for each rider's needs. With some, he was gentle as a lamb. With others, he provided the challenge they needed to build confidence. But perhaps the most touching moment came during a visit from a group of veterans dealing with PTSD. One soldier, James, had barely spoken since returning from deployment. He stood at the fence, watching Thunder with haunted eyes. "He understands, you know," Ella told him quietly, "about being trapped by memories of fear." James turned to her, really looking at her for the first time. "How did you help him move past it?" "I didn't," Ella smiled. "He helped himself. I just showed him he wasn't alone." That day, James spent an hour just talking to Thunder, the horse standing perfectly still, listening. When he finally left, there were tears on his cheeks, but his shoulders were straighter. "You've created something magical here," Richard told Ella that evening as they watched Thunder grazing in the sunset. "Your parents would be so proud." "We created it," Ella corrected him. "You, me, Thunder, everyone who believed when others doubted." As if hearing his name, Thunder lifted his head and walked over to them. He pressed his muzzle against Ella's cheek in what had become their familiar gesture of affection. "You know what I've learned?" Ella said, stroking his face. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to our true purpose. My accident, Thunder's trauma, they brought us together so we could help others find their strength." Richard watched as Thunder gently played with Ella's hair, making her laugh. The wild, dangerous stallion had become a gentle giant, while the broken-hearted girl had become a beacon of hope for others. "You're right," he said softly. "Sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as our greatest challenges." As the sun set over Pine Valley, casting long shadows across the arena where so many lives had been changed, Ella wheeled herself to the mounting ramp. Thunder followed without being asked, positioning himself perfectly beside her. "One more ride?" she asked Richard. He smiled, helping her mount up. "One more ride." As they walked under the stars, Ella free and confident on Thunder's back, Richard thought about all the people who had said it couldn't be done, that a wild horse couldn't be tamed by a girl in a wheelchair, that their story would end in tragedy. But they had proven that love is stronger than fear, that trust can bridge any gap, and that sometimes the most beautiful partnerships are formed between those whom society deems broken. Thunder and Ella continued their evening ride, their silhouette against the darkening sky a reminder that limitations exist only where hope ends, and miracles begin where fear is transformed into faith.